I think subconsciously part of the reason why I had children was so I could carry on building sandcastles. Fun afternoons or days spent on the beach as a child. It's the fun, isn't it, of building up the walls, or building a castle and then building the walls. And if you get really creative, building moats with tunnels and bridges, and you can spend hours doing that. And it's the fun of it is the creation, but then it's trying to establish how thick can I make my walls so they can, keep the sea at bay? How long can I resist the oncoming tide? And then the wave starts to lap, doesn't it, against the base of the wall, and it crumbles, and so you mad scramble, rebuild the wall, build it higher and higher, and then a little bit of water gets over the top, and so you get rid of the water, and you try to make sure, and you tell yourself all the while you're building, we can do this, we can keep this castle here as long as we can. And then there's that one final wave that comes and just breaches all of your defenses and washes it all away. Fun afternoons in the sun in an English seaside. Other nations are available, of course. And that's great, isn't it, if it's a leisure activity for a few hours. It's desperate if it's a picture of a life that has no lasting impact or no lasting significance. But what does lasting significance and legacy and impact really look like anyway? There are plenty of great men and women of history who've spent decades building things only to watch it crumble in their hands. And in fact, everything that's come before us that people have built and thought, this is going to outlive me, I'm going to make a name for myself, all of them eventually, essentially, just return to dust, to sand. What in life really lasts? One of the things I like doing is watching Match of the Day, normally on a Sunday morning, because I'm not a late person, I have to go to bed. But when you watch a football match, the outcome of which you already know, it's quite a strange kind of experience, isn't it? Because say there's a team and they score one goal and they go ahead, but you know that because you've read the news, you know that they're going to ultimately lose this game. When you watch that first goal go in, there's this kind of perverse pleasure I have of kind of just mocking them in their joy, their enthusiasm, their elation. They score the goal and they feel they're elated. They're full of all the feelings of salvation and acceptance. And I've arrived in life. And as watching it the next morning, you know how it ends. So you can look at them and think, that's just hollow, isn't it? That's not real joy. It's slightly pathetic. You think you're going to win, whereas I know you're going to lose. Ultimately, that goal that they celebrated counted for nothing. We're going to read from Luke chapter 16 and consider the genius of Jesus as part of our teaching series looking at the way of Jesus. And we're going to be asking this question: what does a life invested well look like? Or what does true investment, wise investment with our time and our energy and our pursuits really involve today? Luke 16. He also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And so he called him and he said to him, what's this I hear about you? Turn in your account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master's taking away the management from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do, so that when I'm removed from management, people will receive me into their houses. And so, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly and write 50. And then he said to another, how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, quickly, take your bill and write 80. And the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of worldly wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. One who is faithful with very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you've not been faithful with the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you've not been faithful with that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed him. This is God's word. And what does it look like to follow Jesus? That's what we've been asking since late September. And we've seen that it looks like following the way of Jesus, that a Christian is someone who primarily is an apprentice of a master. We're not those who tick boxes and say, I believe this doctrine and that doctrine only. We're those who say, I follow that teacher and I do as he says. We've said that the way of Jesus involves claiming and living out of a new identity that's ours. If you're a Christian, it involves resisting evil. It involves having a single focus in our priorities. It involves, as we heard last week, using our homes to show hospitality to the stranger. Today's parable and Bible reading that Jesus gives us concerns our wealth, our stuff, our money. And it's about making investments, ultimately, that last for eternity and leave a legacy. Now, I know particularly when we're talking about money and wealth, it can be hard for us. However, before we can do what Jesus tells us to do, we need to, first of all, learn to see as Jesus sees. And so I find a helpful prayer, maybe to start us off, would be this. Help me to see what you see. Help me to see as you see, that I might do as you say. Ultimately, that's what a disciple is, isn't it? Jesus says something, we do it. Straightforward, except it's not. So today, as we approach the Bible, we're asking this: God, help me to see as you see, that I might do as you say. Help us to see as you see, that we might do as you do today. Amen. Now, much of Jesus' teaching centers around correcting or challenging the way that people were thinking or living, particularly challenging religious-minded people, self-righteous people, people who made it their duty to try to honor and please God. Jesus shares and reserves his harshest words for people like them. Now, this chapter began with the phrase, he also said to them, meaning he's been speaking to them already. And in the chapter before this, Jesus is wanting the religious people particularly to consider and the question would be, how does God view sinners, people who've gone astray? And so in that chapter 15, he tells them three parables. He tells them the parable of the lost sheep. It's familiar to many of us. A sheep goes astray. The shepherd loses it, so he scours the hills night and day to find the sheep, and then he celebrates when he finds it. He tells us the parable of the lost coin, a widow who's lost her wealth, overturns her entire house to find the coin. She finds it, she's delighted. And then he ends with the parable of the lost son, known to many of us as the prodigal son. A child who's gone astray, and a father who scours the horizon, desperately waiting for the son to return. And Jesus says this is how God views sinners. He searches for them. He celebrates when they return. And the religious people knew that this was aimed at them. The sting in the tail at the end of the lost son's parable is aimed at the religious leaders, and they knew this. And so almost just as they're kind of like, here he goes again, they're starting to walk away, and he begins, doesn't he, this opening parable. There once was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought against this man that had been wasting his possessions. He catches their attention before they leave to tell them, how does God view your stuff, your wealth, Pharisees, your wealth, British people, Seafordians, wherever we're from? How does God view your stuff? And in chapter 16, he starts to show it for us. There was a man, and he was behaving badly with his manager's stuff. And so he knew he was going to be fired. And so he thinks to himself, I know what I can do, because I'm too weak to dig and I'm too ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, he says. And so he calls someone in and says, how much do you owe my master? I owe him 100 of this. Okay, quickly, scribble it down and write 80. Wow, 80? You were letting me off 20 of my debt? That's amazing. The man says, if there's anything I can ever do for you, let me know. And he says, don't worry, I will. And it may be sooner than you think. And then the next person comes in. He says, how much do you owe my master? And he tells them, he says, wow, if there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. And he thinks, I will, don't worry. And it may be sooner than you think. And Jesus says, this man has behaved shrewdly, wisely. So what's the moral? What's the point of the parable? Well, as I said, we're going to look at this theme today, the way of true investment. And what's the point of the story, though? Is the point of the story that Jesus commends dishonesty, or dishonesty's okay as long as you get away with it? Is that the point? Dishonesty's okay as long as you get away with it. Well, no, actually in verse 8, Jesus says this. He says, the sons of this age, or this world, he says, the phrase here is, the Greek word is the word eon. The sons of this age, the eon, are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. The people of this age. The people of this world. People who think that this world is all there is. He says they're very shrewd in dealing with this world because they think when you die, nothing's on the other side of death. So therefore, they're very clever with the way that they live. He said they spend a lot of time. They know how to create security for themselves, building trust funds and nest eggs. And they know what to do to gather votes or to get the right experiences in life to satisfy them. They do deals to ensure they're safe and provided for. They're shrewd in this life. By contrast, Jesus says, disciples, followers of him, and bear in mind that for Jesus, in Jesus' mind, a disciple's mentality is very different to someone who thinks that this world is all there is. For Jesus, disciples risk their lives. They give away the things that this world puts their security in. Disciples are devoted to one God as opposed to lots of gods, hedging your bets with lots of worldviews and lots of things that we can do. They're devoted to one God. Disciples, Jesus says, they leave their families to follow him. Disciples have days off. Disciples, and actually in chapter 12, Jesus said this, disciples don't even worry about what they're going to eat or drink. They ignore the natural impulse towards anxiety, that impulse that keeps you alive. Jesus says disciples ignore that because they are focused on a different kingdom, a different age. What Jesus is teaching here is that the way of Jesus involves investing wisely so that you are rewarded not in this age, but in God's presence, in an age, in a realm where it lasts forever. That's real wisdom, he says. This man in the story is quite fascinating. In chapter 16, verse 2, he's told, isn't he, turn in your account. You can no longer be my manager. He knows an end point is coming. But before he reaches that end point, he makes some clever decisions. So, Martin, can you remember this? Turn in the account. An end point is coming. And so we've got some props today. Here's a solid wall. It's a stop. Oh, face it the other way, this way. Thanks. Perfect. There we go. Perfect. So the manager's here. He's told by his head office, turn in your account. In other words, get your house in order because you're traveling towards a point in time that's fixed and stopped, and it's a solid wall that you can't get past. And so the man thinks, okay, well, once I've got over this hurdle, who's going to look after me on the other side of that? I know I'll make decisions so that I can pass it to people on the other side, so I've got friends on the other side of this stop, so that when here I am, I'm beyond this challenging point in my life, I've still got people to look after me. That's what he does. And Jesus commends him for that. He offloads his wealth, he offloads his decisions over to the other side. And Jesus says that is clever. And actually, as followers of the way of Jesus, Jesus wants us to learn to live a bit like that. Be shrewd and wise in our decisions making. Elsewhere in Matthew's Gospel, in chapter 10, Jesus tells his disciples, I want you to be wise as serpents. And that word wise is the same word that's used for shrewd in this parable. I want you to be wise. I want you to be shrewd as serpents in this world. Be smart. Be switched on. In Matthew 7, Jesus says, anyone who hears these words of mine and does them is wise. It's the same word again. He says, anyone who hears these words and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on a rock. It's not a sandcastle that can be taken down by the waves. Be wise, but based on a different eon, a different age, or a different timeline. You know, at school we learn about the different ages, don't we? We learn about the Stone Age and how that became the Bronze Age, which then became the Iron Age, which became the Classical Age, became the Medieval Age. Ages, all of them present. And when you're living in the Iron Age, you think this is all there is. But it was past and it was superseded by another age. The waves of history cause everything to return to the ocean. People who are wise in this age, we think very highly of. Men like Richard Branson and Lord Sugar, impressive businessmen, very shrewd, very wise in this age. Richard Branson, for example, started with £300 selling a student magazine at the age of 16 and now owns a fortune estimated around £3.6 billion. Wise, shrewd. Alan Sugar started with £100 selling car aerials out of a van and now owns £900 million. Wise, clever, impressive, shrewd. In 50 years' time, both of them will be dust. They'll be sand. They'll be dead. They'll be gone. The truth is, Martin, can you have this other one? The truth is that all of us face a solid stop. All of us are going to die. And all of us need to make decisions in our lives based on this ultimate reality. There we go. Oh. Sorry to those of you who are over there. You're missing out on the full effect, but you still get to see Martin's athleticism at the very least. We're all of us going to hit the wall of death. We're all traveling like on one of those airport conveyor belts, aren't we? And we know it's coming. We know it's coming. It's not news that it's coming. And so in light of that fact, with our stuff and our possessions, often there's a couple of things that people do. The first thing they do is they hold on really tightly to all their stuff, and when they die, their stuff dies with them. It's gone. Or the second thing that people do, Martin, can you give me a hand? You can show me your catching skills. The second thing that people do is they have lots of... Go stand over there for me. Get ready. The second thing people do is that they know they're approaching death, and so they quickly pass everything back to their children down the line. Those are the two things that people do with their wealth. Go on the other side. Jesus says, I don't want you to play rugby. I want you to think as American football players who tried to pass their stuff, over the top of the wall of... Can I have it back? Oh, thanks. Jesus says, I want you to think like that, rather than thinking, I'm just going to hold on to it until I die, or I'm just going to pass it back to my children, and then they can pass it back to their children, and we'll just keep it going as long as we can. Jesus says, be wise. Pass it forward. Play it over the top. Or as he says in verse 9, make friends for yourself. Make friends for yourselves by means of, this phrase unrighteous just means worldly wealth, money, stuff, by means of wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. Ross said to us a few weeks ago that the lighter you travel, the less you have to worry about. And so actually everything that we have in life, we ought to be thinking like that. God's given me something. How do I get it over the wall? That's wise living. That's clever investment. I know I'm going to die. How do I send my stuff ahead of me so that when I'm dead, my wealth I'll be rewarded in God's presence? Now, when I say things like that, many of us instantly picture, if you're like me at least, like pagan religious people of the past, like pharaohs and Viking kings, who when they died, they were buried with their wealth, with their treasure troves and their hoards. And that was their way of thinking, I'm going to bury myself with treasure so in the afterlife I'll be rich. And we look at that and we think, that's so silly. And it is silly, because they're dead. They can't use the stuff. So how do we get our stuff from this side of the wall of death onto the other side of the wall of death? Jesus says you get it by using your stuff and seeing your money as a tool. It's a tool. Money belongs, not in a bank, in a toolbox, and you use it for others. You use everything in your life for others. Everything that God gives you, Jesus says, use it in the service of others and in the service of God. And in so doing, you'll be getting it over the top so that you'll have, he says here, you'll have friends that will welcome you into eternity. You'll have riches in the next life. God gives stuff to you, but he doesn't give it for you. He gives it for others to be given through you. That is the way of Jesus that is true investment, thinking like that. Easy, right? Let's all live like that. Except it isn't easy. If you're listening, children, sorry, I went into dad mode then. I just assume no one in my house ever listens to me. Just assumed it's the case on a Sunday morning. But if you're listening, that is called an unhelpful tangent. Anyway, you've said that. You've understandably got questions. I do. You see, the Pharisees heard what Jesus said and they ridiculed him. They thought, this is ridiculous, because they loved wealth. Thought, God makes me rich. It's for me to enjoy. Now, often as a family, we have a time on Friday nights where we have a nice dinner together and watch a film. And I love Friday nights. And part of the reason I love Friday nights is because I ate one the other day. Is because we have these, often like little nice treaty, desserty things from Tesco. This is a melting middle chocolate pudding. I mean, just the name sounds amazing. We have these, and they're nice, but you're supposed to put them in the microwave, like this. Delia Smith for the morning. Oh, how do we do this? I don't think I've ever used this. Bear with. Start. This is where I should have practiced beforehand. Always practice. This is fun, is it? Not for me. I'm slowly dying inside. Something's happening. Something's happening. I don't know if that's going to do something, but it's now just going to get so hot it explodes. Because I want you to feel this, though, because this is a lovely dessert, and when it's done, in a minute we're going to take it out, and it's going to have melted chocolate in the middle, and hopefully you'll get to smell it. In fact, one of you lucky people, I'm going to give it to you, and you can eat it. Are you ready? Got people watching, don't know what to do. That'll do. Okay, here we go. Oh, I was supposed to take the lid off. Okay. Oh, look. Here we go. Watch this. You ready? If you can see this, we're going to break it open. Oh, gooey chocolate middle. It's beautiful. Would anybody like this? Would it? No one? You'd like this? Would you like it enough to come up here and get it? Yeah, come on. I won't trick you. It's not a trick, I promise. Here we go. Because look, just smell this for me. Smell that. Does it smell nice? It does, doesn't it? There you go. Well, wait. Hang on. I don't suppose you'd like to swap it for this little box. It's up to you. That smells absolutely delicious. This is just a little box. What do you want to do? Which choice? You want to swap? Oh, congratulations. What's inside the box? It's £50. There you go. Good swap. You can take that to your seat. Congratulations. I got left with the chocolate thing, though. It's now going to be very hard to talk. Oh, it's yours now. You can have it. You see, the deliberation in her face. What makes life hard is that the thing in front of us is gorgeous. It smells lovely. And the thing that's offered to us, riches on the other side, we have no idea what that could be. And it requires a degree of trust, doesn't it? To say, okay, I won't eat this now, I'll take that box. And who knows what it could have been. We know that life's short, but we often don't know what the alternative to living might be. And so we just get our heads down and build sandcastles. And we say to each other, nice sandcastle, mate. It's a lot of money. And we say, thanks. I don't really know what else to do with it. So the way Jesus reasons with us to convince us to choose the box over the thing in front of you that's warm and smelly and delicious, over the whatever the latest thing is that you really want to use your money for and your stuff for, Jesus convinces us. Listen, firstly, he says, well, in chapter 12, he says of Luke's gospel, he says, sell your possessions and give to the needy. So he says, get your stuff over the top of the wall of death by selling your possessions and giving to the needy. But before he tells them to do that, he says this. He says, fear not, little flock. Fear not, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Therefore, sell your possessions and give to the needy. So the first thing Jesus does to convince us to choose the box or to choose to throw our stuff over the top of death, to give it away, the first way that he tries to convince us is this. You can trust your Father in heaven. He has good things for you. You can trust me. Give your stuff away. Because trying to convince, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, trying to convince someone to be generous is very hard. So Jesus says, first of all, trust God, give your stuff away. But that requires faith. That's hard. So he also appeals to them on a different ground. Was it in verse 10 of what we read? Jesus says this. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. One who is dishonest in very little is dishonest in much. If you then have been faithful, be faithful with the worldly wealth, then you will be entrusted with true riches. Jesus says, on the one hand, trust God, give your stuff away, become a generous person. But on the other, not on the other hand, point two, another way of convincing you, there's this principle, he says, at work in the world. And you're all familiar with it. This isn't a Christian thing or a Bible thing. This is just a life thing. If you're faithful with small things, you get more. If you put money in a bank and you leave it there, you get more back, usually. There's this principle, the universal law of returns, it's called. You get this, I did some maths, so it's probably wrong. But if you put £1,000 in the bank as a teenager and you have a 10%, that's good, I know, but if you have a 10% return on your money, let's say it stays at 10% your entire life. And let's say you leave that £1,000 that you put in there as a teenager, you leave it until you retire. By the time you retire, you will have £45,000 in return. Because that's how interest works. You earn interest, and then you earn interest on the interest, and interest on the interest on the interest. You're faithful with the small, and you're given more. Jesus says this law applies not just to money in a bank, but it applies to everything in the universe. One philosopher puts it like this. It says, no matter what we sow, good or evil, love or hate, grapes or thorns, a compliment or a complaint, whatever we invest, we tend to get it back with interest. Lovers are loved, haters hated, forgivers usually get forgiven. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. God is not mocked. You reap what you sow. That's the principles. Trust God on the one hand, but also, if that's hard, just obey the universal law of returns. And so the question is, when it comes to your wealth or your money or possessions, according to Jesus, how do you sow your money? How do you use it to trust God? The answer he gives, you ready? You're going to like this. That was nice. The answer he gives is this. The way you use your wealth and your money is you have to give it away. You have to use it for others. Just as to unleash the power of the seed, you have to give it away and put it in the ground, and you'll receive a harvest. so it is with our stuff. And that's the logic of the way of Jesus. Help me to see as you see, that I may do as you say. See, for Jesus, generosity isn't recklessness, it's faithfulness. It's this generosity that gets the well done of heaven. And it gets proved worthy with a little and so is given more. That's the logic of the way of Jesus. Just quickly, the motive of the way of Jesus. You see, in thinking about what's the motivation to do this? Because I can't see what's on the other side of death. I can trust God and I can believe the law of returns, but what else? And I found this knockout illustration that I thought I'd use. I don't know if you've seen the film Schindler's List. At the end of the film Schindler's List, Oskar Schindler is looking at all these survivors of the Holocaust, Jews that are standing around him, and he realizes that if only he'd have sold more of his stuff, got rid of more of his possessions, he could have saved more lives. And he breaks down in tears. And so I got this video prepared and I thought, do you know what? That is a killer illustration. That's going to tug on heartstrings. That's going to make us open to what God wants to do. And then I read the Bible carefully. And I realized Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus doesn't emotionally blackmail. He doesn't say, for the sake of those that will go to hell or for the sake of those that will die, use your wealth. And come on, you can save people. You owe it to them. He doesn't guilt people. He doesn't emotionally blackmail people. He doesn't say there are refugees who need housing. Do it for their sake. Come on. Jesus doesn't use the tools of comic relief and of children in need. Instead, do you know what he does? Well, what I realize about Jesus is that ultimately he doesn't want something from them. He wants something for them. In Proverbs 11:24, it says that the world of the generous gets larger and larger, but the world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. Your world increases the more you are generous. You will be welcomed into heaven, he says. You will have things waiting for you. He appeals to them. This is the way of Jesus. Seek rewards for yourself. But the way you seek those rewards is by giving your stuff away. But you will be rewarded. So it's almost like he's appealing to a selfish motive, but it's a healthy form because it's saying this is an appropriate way of living, an appropriate reward. You should be single-minded in your focus. You should have a Sabbath. You should fight lies and claim truth. You should, for you. Jesus wants this not from you, for you. I'm not up here saying, let's give all our money away because we've got a fundraising campaign. We don't want anything from you. We want things for you as disciples of Jesus. Or as the prophet Jonah puts it, he says, those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. Those who cling to this stuff forfeit all the grace that could be theirs. You should give generously and sacrificially of your money and of your time and of your house and of everything you have, because you will be rewarded. You will be blessed. If not in this life, then in the presence of God for eternity. You know what I realize as well is that this was Jesus' motivation. In Hebrews 12, the writer says this, let us fix our eyes on Jesus. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame. For the joy that was set before him, for the reward set before him, he endured the cross and scorned its shame. Pursue proper rewards. Turn your life from being an afternoon building sandcastles to building and investing in something that will last for eternity. Live generously. Follow the way of Jesus, the way of true investment. Trust God. Trust the law of returns in the universe. And seek rewards for yourself that last. Let's invest our lives wisely. Amen. Let's pray.